So how do you even begin to explain something as big as a radical spiritual change? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down a sermon that does it in a really cool way by connecting a messy, late-night snack to an ancient story of transformation. Let's dive in and see how this whole message is put together.
The sermon kicks off with this really powerful idea, and I think a lot of us can probably relate to this feeling, right? But where does this idea of being lost in the dark even come from? Well, it all starts with a surprisingly funny and very human personal story. All right, so the first part of this whole thing sets up this big idea of spiritual blindness. And you know what's interesting? It doesn't start with some heavy theological point. Nope, it starts with a hilarious story about something we've all done, making a mess. Okay, picture this. The pastor is craving leftover hibachi late at night. He's tiptoeing around, trying not to wake anybody up, and then bam! Of course, he stubs his toe on the couch. The plate goes flying, and now there's rice and yum-yum sauce everywhere. But here's the key part. Instead of just turning on the light, he tries to clean it all up in the dark. He's just fumbling around, making things worse. And this is the perfect metaphor, right, for how we so often try to fix our own lives without any real clarity.
And this is the big transition. The sermon just beautifully pivots from that funny, super relatable image of cleaning up spilled rice in the dark to its really serious central theme, that feeling of struggling to manage our own messes, our deepest problems, while feeling completely blind.
So if the problem is that we're all just walking around in the dark, what's the solution? Well, the next part of the sermon gets into the answer, what it calls new vision. Let's dig into what that actually means.
Okay, and this right here, this is the core idea of the entire message. The big insight is that a true spiritual encounter isn't about changing your circumstances, the things you see around you. It's about a fundamental, total shift in your perspective. It's about changing how you see everything. It's a change from the inside out.
That's a pretty big, abstract idea. So to make it really hit home, the sermon focuses on one specific case study. It uses the story of a man who was blind from birth to show us exactly what this new way of seeing looks like in real life.
All right, so now we're diving into the heart of the story. This next part walks us through this famous miracle, but the sermon really encourages us to pay close attention to the specific details, because that's where the lessons are.
Just look at this process. It's pretty unconventional, to say the least. The sermon points out that the method, making mud with spit and putting it on the guy's eyes, is just weird. But the two most important parts here are Jesus' very specific, strange instruction and the man's simple act of obedience. He had to actually do something to be a part of his own miracle.
So from this one little story, the sermon pulls out three huge takeaways. It really deconstructs this miracle to talk about seeing purpose in our problems, how change creates a story you can't deny, and the incredible power of your own personal experience.
And this is where things get really interesting. You see this huge contrast, right? On one hand, you have the disciples. They see this blind man, and immediately they want to analyze the problem, figure out who to blame. But then you have Jesus. He sees the exact same situation and doesn't see a problem at all. He sees an opportunity for a purpose to be revealed. This is that first big lesson on changing how you see.
And this just builds right on top of that last point. The sermon makes this incredible argument that our biggest struggles, the very things we wish would just go away, are often the exact things that can become the platform for something amazing. The big idea here is that our pain doesn't have to be wasted. So, what happens when that purpose is revealed and a life gets totally turned around? Well, the man is healed, and right away people notice. This is the sermon's second major takeaway. When real internal change happens, it creates a visible external story. You just can't hide it. And that change becomes the most powerful proof there is.
But here's a really interesting twist. The change is so huge, so radical, that his own neighbors start arguing about whether it's even the same guy. The sermon points out that the people who are used to the old you might actually struggle to accept the new you. Real transformation can be pretty disruptive.
And all of this confusion and arguing, well, it leads right to the climax of the story. This man's healing isn't just a private little thing. It becomes a full-blown public controversy, and he's actually forced to defend it against some pretty skeptical people.
You can just feel the pressure building. The religious leaders, they were called Pharisees, are not buying it. First, they grill the guy. When that doesn't work, they call in his parents, who are too scared to say much of anything. So they go back to the man and basically try to bully him into agreeing that this whole thing is a sham. They're trying to argue him out of his own experience.
So this all leads to the million-dollar question, right? With all this intellectual and social pressure coming at him from every angle, how does this ordinary guy with no power or status defend what happened to him?
And his answer? It's just brilliant. It's not some complex theological argument. It's the simplest, most powerful, and most undeniable statement of his personal experience. He doesn't get into a debate. He just tells them his truth. Look, I was one way, and now I'm another. End of story.
And this is really the sermon's mic drop moment. A changed life is the ultimate argument. The man's personal experience was way more powerful than any intellectual debate the authorities could cook up. That lived reality creates a kind of faith that just silences all the doubt.
So after all that, it really all boils down to this one. The sermon circles all the way back to its beginning. It's all about that one moment, that one encounter, that one decision that can flip the light switch and change everything. And that leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought to chew on. This whole journey, from a messy kitchen floor to a profound miracle, it all leads to a really personal question. What does it mean in your own life to say, I was blind, but now I see? What's the undeniable power of your own story?